Hi YouTube, welcome to the channel or welcome back to the channel. My name is Kain and I'm very excited for today's video. Now the reason why I'm so excited is in today's video we're going to be looking at all the viable and optimal build paths for Vladimir. Now I feel like personally that most Vladimir players, they just go the first build that you see here on the screen, which is the standard build, and they do it in like 99% of their games, but I feel like there's a lot more you can optimize build-wise if you really want to climb with Vladimir. So first and foremost, let's start with that standard build. So it's very simple. The standard build is typically going to be sorcery shoes. So you have some pen. It's like you could go Ionian boots, but sorcery shoes, they're typically a better first item power spike on boots. So then sorcery shoes are typically preferred over Ionian boots. To have some ability haste in our build, then typically you go Cosmic Drive. It gives you some survivability with HP. It gives you the ability haste. And that's the main reason why we typically go it. Also, it gives you the movement speed, but after the nerfs a couple of patches ago, I'm not really going it necessarily for the movement speed. It's still just in general one of the only items that gives Vladimir 25 ability haste, and that is just insanely good. Now, on your second item, if you don't need a Void Staff on your third item, you could actually go Riftmaker's second item, then a Death Cap, and then a Void Staff. Now, if you need your Void Staff earlier, so let's say you have like 3 APs on your team, so you're like playing Vladimir mid lane, they have a Gwen top lane, and you play Vladimir mid, you have a Gwen top and a Luke support. You have 3 AP champions on your team in that case, so the enemies are very likely to at some point build magic resist. So then I would say you will definitely need your Void Staff as soon as possible on the third item. And then typically you don't want to like stall your Death Cap, like your most powerful item in the game, to your fourth item. You don't want to do that. So when you need your Void Staff, because you have a lot of AP on your team, I would go Death Cap secondary and then Void Staff as a third item, and then you could go as a fourth item, whatever you like. That could be a Riftmaker because it's a very gold efficient item on you, but if you need more survivability, you could go with Zhonya's, you could go with Banshees. There's a lot of options that you could choose from. But that's going to be the main build. Now, I'm also not going to talk specifically about like full builds because I feel like you almost never get to full build and you can basically build whatever you like on Vladimir after you bought the core items. You could even build tank items, to be honest. So this is, in case you need a Void Staff early, this is the build. If you don't need a Void Staff early, I would go typically with Cosmic Riftmaker into Death Cap. However, if I do have the economy, so even though I don't need a Void Staff early and I do have like the gold to the economy to build a Death Cap early, I would still buy it as a second item, then go Riftmaker, then go Void. But typically you don't have the gold to build a Death Cap instantly, and then Riftmaker is a little bit better because the build path is easier. Then you go Death Cap, then you go Void. But again, if you need Void Stuff earlier, you go Void as a third item, Death Cap as a second item. Alright, with that being said, let's move on to the next build, and that's going to be our double flat penetration build. So both Storm Surge and Shadow Flame. Now, I don't see many people go this build, but it's an amazing build if you build it in the right team comp. So, when would you build this? Very simple, actually. So, if you play against enemies that have very low MR, so let's say you are the only AP champion on your team, then enemies don't necessarily have a lot of reason to stack magic resist, because you're the only person that builds MR, that has AP on your team. So, if they have low MR, flat penetration is extremely valuable to build into those people. So then going full flat penetration, sorcery shoes, storm surge, shadow flame, that's full flat penetration is amazing. Now, on top of that, I typically would only build shadow flame if on top of them having low MR, they're also low health. Because if they have like low MR, but they have a lot of like max health, like a Cassiopeia with like Rod of Ages or something, or a Rise with Rod of Ages, then I would probably still not go Shadow Flame because it's going to be hard for you to proc the passive on the Shadow Flame to make your abilities or the damage on your abilities crit, right? So this is only really good if if the enemy team comp is both low maximum health and low magic resist. Then this is an absolute amazing build. Now, of course, if they start building magic resist because you're fat or something, you can still include a Void Stuff here at the end, but typically I would go with something a little bit more ability haste oriented, like a Riftmaker again, or a Zhonya's. Because in this build, the only thing that you will lack is ability haste. Now, typically you don't need ability haste, because you're gonna one-tap people in one go, that's why we go this build. But if you really wanted to have some ability haste, some extra, you could argue that you could say, okay, I'm gonna go Ionian boots into double pen. Now we still have a lot of flat penetration, but we also have some extra ability haste from the boots. Now for me, the extra ability haste from the boots, it's only 10 ability haste. So for me, it's like too insignificant to build it. And also, when you build flat penetration, flat magic penetration, the more you have of it, increasingly, like exponentially, the better it becomes, the more useful it becomes. That's why I would still go Sorks. Now, if you go this build, again, you could go in your runes, something like Transcendence plus Legend Haste, to make sure that you have as much ability haste as possible from your runes, so that you can really go this build. Alright, that's it for this build. Let's go to the other build. Now, what if we are playing against an enemy team comp that has low magic resist, so we are like the solo AP champion on our team, but they do have high AP. So I just told you I wouldn't go the previous build here, the double, it's like Storm Surge plus Shadow Flame. If the enemies, even if they have no MR, but if they have like a lot of HP, like a Ryze or a Cassiopeia, or let's say a Sion who's building armor, right? He still has a lot of HP, or like a Cho'Gath. So these people are still going to be difficult to kill, and your Shadow Flame won't crit against them, because you won't get them below like 40 or 35% HP. It's 40%, I think, yeah. So then this build is going to be a lot better in my opinion. So what we're going to do is we're going to go Sorks into, you could choose which direction you want to go here. So you could go Sorks into a Storm Surge for like early game, like having a lot of damage and also movement speed. And then here we go Cosmic Drive to make sure that we have some ability haste to get off extra ability rotation against those people with more HP, which is going to be a lot more useful than the Shadow Flame who wouldn't crit or that wouldn't crit in the first place. Now, the order in which you want to buy this, it's personal preference. I like having ability haste early on in the lane because it makes you so much, it makes it so much easier for you to play the lane. Your W is on a lower cooldown. You have more Q, so more sustain. So then if I could really choose, I would prefer going Cosmic Drive into Storm Surge rather than going Storm Surge into Cosmic Drive. So this would be my preferred build path. And yeah, that would be what I would be going. Then, of course, you could finish off the build with a death cap. If at any point the enemies do start building magic resist, you could always still include a void staff. Otherwise, again, I would go with Sonia's for survivability. Or if I don't need survivability, if I don't need percentage pen, my go-to item will always be Riftmaker because it's such a good item on Vladimir. Alright, with that being said, let's move on to another build. So this build is very similar to the standard build here, right? It's very similar. And it's basically what I already talked about. So when the enemy team, or like when we have a lot of AP on our team, right? The enemies are going to stack magic resist. Therefore, because the enemies will stack magic resist, we will typically need our void staff early on in the game. That means we're going to need it as a third item. So then actually I would like to go Sorks into Cosmic Drive, you could go a Riftmaker, but again, I would probably prefer going Death Cap, and then Void Staff, and then going Riftmaker. This is basically this is the alternative of the standard build, because in my eyes, the standard build is this, when you don't need a Void Staff early on. So this would be the standard build, Cosmic Drive, Riftmaker, Death Cap. And then when you do need a Void Staff early on, I would swap out my Riftmaker for a Death Cap on a second item, because otherwise our Death Cap is our fourth item, and once again, I don't like that. It's such a big power spike, I don't want to keep it until my fourth item. So that's why I would just do this. In this case, I would go this build. When the enemies will stack magic resist, I need a void early on, and then I would go Cosmic second item. So this is like an alternative standard build. Alright, now let's move on to some tankier builds, right? And this build is actually very interesting. So here, what are we going to do? If the enemy team is very tanky and they have like a lot of max HP champions. So let's say they have a Sion, they have an Amumu or a Cho'Gath, or, you know, like those high max HP enemy champions. Like a Swain or something in the mid lane, or, you know, like, you know, all the champions with a lot of max HP. In those games, specifically like tanky champions or bruiser champions are typically melee or like short ranged. So then in those comps, it would be really nice to build a Riftmaker because the fights are going to last long. So you're going to be able to utilize your Riftmaker a lot. Liandry's is going to be amazing because again, max health damage versus teams with high max health is going to be amazing. Then you could go with Death Cap or a Void, depending on the situation. If they have a lot of max health and they are also stacking magic resist pretty early on, you could go a Void and then go Death Cap. This would be completely fine. Now, typically, like they can either choose. They can either stack magic resist or like HP, right? So then if they stack a lot of HP, I don't feel like you necessarily need a void stuff early on. So you could go Death Cap as a third item and then void stuff as a fourth item. Then again, if you need even more ability haste, you could finish this build off with a Cosmic Drive or Zhonya's for some sustainability, etc. Now, if you play versus a team comp where the enemies are, let's say, they are tanky, but they're like bruiser tanky. They're like not tanky. For example, a Cho'Gath has like an insane amount of HP, right? So Liandry's is really good against a Cho'Gath or a Scion, like those champions with like an insane amount of HP. But what if they don't have that? What if they just have like bruiser type champions, like let's say a Silas. A Silas is like not squishy if he goes like the Conqueror Cosmic Drive build. He's not going to be squishy, but he's also not necessarily tanky. He's just a bruiser. So at that point, you're not going to get that much value from a Liandry's. So then I feel like you could just swap out your Liandry's for a Cosmic Drive. So we remove Liandry's and we replace Liandry's with a Cosmic Drive. And then I feel like this would be the better setup. Now, why do I mention this? Liandry's is typically only really good on champions that have either a high range and also typically like low ability cooldowns. And the reason for that is, Liandry's is constant damage. So if you can constantly damage your opponent, that's really good. Vladimir is quite short ranged, so it's difficult to constantly attack enemies. And also you have relatively high cooldowns. So that's another reason why it's also a little bit harder to constantly proc your Liandry's burn. That's why Cosmic Drive is really efficiently on you. So if they don't have that many like max health champions, then I would just go Cosmic Drive. But otherwise, again, I would go a Liandry's here in this build. So then I would do something like this. Now, are there other builds viable on Vladimir or other items? Yes, I believe even tank items on Vladimir are completely fine. If you have like a lot of AP in your team and the enemy team has a lot of like AP champions, I feel like Abyssal Mask is something you could definitely go. You could even build items like a Frozen Heart on Vladimir. I've tried it where I go like this Riftmaker. So I've tried this tanky build, which is really, really fun. So like in Riftmaker, I go Riftmaker, Abyssal Mask, Frozen Heart, something like that. And then I start building some more AP, right? Then I start building, you could build something like a Liandry's, or if you, even a Death Cap if you have the economy for it. So you can really start building whatever you want. You could even build a Bloodletter's Curse. And this is more like a really tanky, but fun and strong alternative for Vladimir. It's like you're not going to get one tapped, you will survive a long time. And since you still have a lot of AP, because this gives you extra AP damage, Riftmaker gives you AP. It's very gold efficient on Vladimir as well. And then Bloodletter's Curse also gives you AP. You're actually really, really strong and tanky at the same time. So builds like this are also completely viable. Are they optimal? I'm not sure about that, but they're definitely viable. That's why I don't necessarily mention it, so I'm going to remove it here. This guide is where typically I just want to talk about the optimal builds, and these are in my mind the most optimal builds for all the cases that we talked about. Now, if you guys have some questions, feel free to ask them in the comments down below. Hopefully other people can answer the question and we can help each other out. I will answer your comments and I will answer to your questions. So don't be worried if you have some questions. Now, with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.